Hello, my name is Mary Dyer and I work at the University of Huddersfield. I'm a senior lecturer for early childhood studies courses, both undergraduate and postgraduate.
And hi, I'm Samantha McMahon and I work with Mary at the University of Huddersfield in the School of Education and Professional Development, teaching on a range of early years courses, the postgraduate MA, really working a lot with practitioners and students who want to work with young children.
What we'd like to talk about is a book we've recently had published, why we wrote that book and where we think we will progress in terms of engaging with the workforce about the issues within that publication. So, first of all, think about, Sam, why we wrote the book and what we hoped it would achieve.
Yeah, so the book is focused on, and it's called Professionalism and Leadership in Early Childhood Education, and really it basically does what it says on the cover. What we're really trying to do is tell the stories, isn't it, of a number of the practitioners that we've worked with over the years on our various courses, and they were kind enough to share with us their experiences as they worked towards professional qualifications. And I think one of the things that we've been talking about is how amazed we were by how knowledgeable they are, how committed they are, and that really strong ethic of care that they have.
And also the complexity of the job that they do, and the fact that sometimes the value of this very much gets overlooked by the parents that they work with, but also by the policymakers and government departments who rely a lot on the services they provide, but at the same time don't necessarily give it the value that recognises the different things and the different skills that they bring to that role. And what we've tried to do is celebrate how our practitioners, through the stories that they tell, really celebrate the values and the expertise that they bring to this. And to some extent, look at how we can use that and reflect that in the teaching that we do. So through our early childhood education and care degree, through our MA in education, really bring out all those different ideas about the ethics of care, the importance of education, and the family support that these practitioners provide, both within the English early years sector, but also in an international context, because some of these issues that we've raised and some of the tensions that our practitioners have reported happen across the world.
Yeah, and I think what's really unusual, and you're thinking about professionals who are responsible for safeguarding, for inclusive practice, equality, diversity, spreading out, as you say, into the community. There aren't many professions actually who have that level of responsibility. And it's terribly difficult to measure, isn't it, the impact of that. And, you know, what we notice is when it's not there.
We know when it goes wrong, we know when it's missing, and the only way it ever gets measured is through children's educational outcomes, rather than through that real boundary-crossing multi-agency approach to early years practice that anybody across the world in the early years sector will be so familiar with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things as well is, and why it links with leadership, is that they're often in charge, not just perhaps of a room of children, but, you know, they're leading practice, they're sort of directing and mentoring and coaching other people in the setting, aren't they? So they're really taking a really complex role in terms of that pedagogical and distributed leadership, which with high levels of accountability at times, which also is not necessarily recognised.
As well as being expected to run a sustainable and ethical service and a sustainable business for other people's employment. And one of the things that we've learnt through our research and through our experience of working with the sector is that actually a lot of the recognition needs to be generated by the workforce themselves. It needs to be them that's flagging up what they do, the complexity that their roles involve, the expertise that they bring to this. They need to be showing what that is and demanding almost the recognition that should get. And at the moment, we know the infrastructure isn't there for that to happen.
And I think one of the things that I think this book does is it complements a lot of the work that we do in the university on our courses, which is really that idea of being the reflective practitioner. And one of those things is, recognising all of these skills, this knowledge, you know, the commitment that you have, and where you then fit within a sort of a professional scale or across allied professions. And so I think that what we're doing when we're teaching them, hopefully, is we're making a lot of this stuff that's perhaps invisible or not seen or not valued even by the workforce itself. I think what we're doing, and we do this through the book and in our teaching, is we make that explicit and we encourage them, you know, to really see what they're doing.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is, through the book and through our teaching, challenge that taken for granted assumption that people will contribute their own disposition, their own values, and particularly their own time, and actually empower the practitioners of the future to ask for that recognition and to expect that recognition.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the things we're really hoping that will come out of this is that we continue or we contribute to a sort of professional conversation that's already ongoing. And you can see this, people who are on Twitter, and you know, there are worries, aren't there, in the workforce about the level of recruitment and retention, but yet we know that we've got these really amazing practitioners out there who are doing this work day in, day out, who are these professionals, who are these leaders, and yet their work is not necessarily perhaps valued or seen in the same light as other people.
Yeah, and I think some of that is around terms like care and education. Yeah. There's a lot of debate coming out now, a lot of conversation about why we're using the word care. And I know a lot of practitioners, through your research, through mine, through our teaching, who would be very loath to lose the notion of care and the ethic of care. And yet it does become problematic when you're trying to claim expertise and professional status. And that's a reason for actually bringing the workforce together to discuss that.
Yeah.
And to talk about how it fits and how you present what seems to be a very personal trait as something that actually has a professional value.
And so these are some of the themes that we explore in the book, aren't we? Things around, for example, the idea of professional love and ethic of care, you know, how that can be articulated and what that might look like, which again is not easy when you're trying to put it against a set of professional standards which might be laid down or set out by the government that doesn't necessarily see that.
And I think it's also how it translates into leadership.
Yeah.
Because it's a very 21st century view of leadership.
Yeah.
That it is underpinned by care and compassion, not just for the people you work for as service users, but also the people you work with as colleagues.
Yeah, I think that's a really sort of under-acknowledged sort of part of leadership, is really about thinking about the people that you are working with and alongside. And I think that that's something within the sector that we do need to give more attention to, because there is sometimes, you know, I think with all professionals who are working with people, is that they sort of subsume their own selves into that work. But actually, if you don't look after yourself and you don't look after your workforce, then the quality of care and education that they can provide is likely to be compromised.
Yeah, I think very much so.
Yeah.
So, on reading the book, what are we hoping that our readership gets from this?
Well, I think hopefully, first and foremost, I think they'll get some really interesting stories. We've got some great narratives in there. We've got our lovely participants who were really kind and shared with us, didn't they? You know, and they're all wonderful, wonderful practitioners. So I hope, even at the most basic level, if you just enjoy, you know, a story, but I think you'll get some ideas, different ideas about what professionalism might look like and what it might be. You know, as you said, you know, that international perspective, it's not viewed everywhere in the same way.
Yeah, and I think it would be nice to see a greater understanding of the value of care, the importance of care within a professional framework, and that it has its place alongside skills for planning for educational outcomes, leading and managing within a small organisation for early years. So I think the conversation needs to start about what it means to be an early years practitioner and what that looks like in terms of professionalism and professional status.
And I think the workforce themselves are, you know, they're really crucial, aren't they? They're key to this, because Again, we know that there are external standards which are already imposed, and we know that Ofsted set their particular brief, within their inspection frameworks and what have you. But the workforce themselves know what works. What do they need to do on an everyday basis to meet the needs of their children and the families that they work with? And they've got to be really at the centre and at the heart of articulating this, I think, if we're going to move this professionalism and the idea of professionalisation forward.
Yeah, I think given the history of development within the early years sector in England, particularly in this century, it really is time for the voice of the workforce to be front and centre in these conversations, rather than it simply being about externally set standards.
Yeah, I think that's really the key phrase there, that idea of voice. And I know you can't necessarily give somebody a voice, they already have a voice. But actually it's about being able to use that voice in a way which will get people to listen.
It's the opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, one of the most powerful ways to do that is through a professional network. And that's one of the things that we do advocate for quite strongly in the book, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's where the book finishes.
Yeah.
And I think where the workforce needs to start.
Yeah.
And I say the workforce, we're part of that workforce.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we are a very specific part, and I think it needs to come from practice, just as much as from the professional educators.
Yeah, and this is already being done. I think, it's not an insurmountable task. It is already being done in other countries, not too far away. Ireland, for example. They've got a trade union, they've got, they are supported within the government, but they have, the workforce have been campaigning and lobbying for a career structure and better pay, and that's happening. And so that really can give us hope, I think, that we can change this.
Yeah, it has been done, and it's come out of the workforce itself. So I think from that point of view, it's more about the opportunities for bringing people together. My own research, I think, one of the main findings I found was isolation of small organisations. So what we're looking for is opportunities to bring those groups of people together and to see that they have common ground that they could articulate in a joint way.
Yeah.
One of the ways we're going to try and do this is by holding our own meeting or conference at the beginning of March and drawing on speakers with experience of this, particularly Mary Maloney, who's been involved in the work in Ireland, and looking at what is required in terms of a professional network and how that might be facilitated.
Yeah, and we've also got other speakers as well who, sort of leading really in terms of thinking about how we develop pedagogical leadership and looking again to international models and learning again from research, but also how that can link with, for example, the latest graduate practitioner status, which I think is an interesting development. But in order to make the most of that and capitalise on it, the workforce have really got to sort of embrace it and sort of acknowledge it and take it on board.
Yeah, there needs to be much more ownership of that. It's in its early days.
Yeah, it is.
So it has a lot of potential, but it is something that we all need to talk about.
Yeah.